You asked for it, and now it's time. This is the Triarii build video. Hey everyone, Derpy here, and welcome back to another Battle Pirates video. As I get started, I do want to remind you that you can jump around to whatever section you're looking for, be that the intro, the build stock, the specials, the armors, and the final thoughts, using the YouTube chapters featured down below. As we get started, I want to tell you that all my builds, including the one for the Triarii here, are available in my build stock, which you can access for free in the link which is in the description of any of my YouTube videos. It has all the builds out there for my ships, including the one I'm about to show you right now. You can copy and paste the Kixeye hash code into your shipyard. Let's go ahead and get started. As I jump into it, I do want to show you the stat block on the flagship first and explain the few differences that it has. Now, the really things you need to be aware of for the Triarii is that it does have a special fleet-wide aura for the flagship, which will boost your survival. That's about it, and the only other difference I would expect is some sort of other aura at X1, but for now, the flagship Triarii is not all that different from everyone else, and really, you don't even need it. If it did something more powerful, and I guess the projectile speed debuff will help against the mortars, which are your biggest problem in this fleet, it will be worth building and upgrading a lot more of. But for now, I'm going to continue to upgrade it without expecting it to do all that much better. Now, the most important thing you need to understand for your regular Triarii is that it has a built-in anti-rocket system, and this is really powerful. Unfortunately, it only works when you are stopped. That means if you're driving these targets like we've driven most other Garrison targets, going around and trying to outrun things, you're going to have a bad day. What you want to do is stop when those rockets are firing at you, but that is a conversation for a target video and not a build video. Let's go ahead and jump into the weapons. The first thing I want you to do is throw 4 gales across all your ships. This is really important, and notice you can only fit them in 4 slots, you can't fit them in all 8. This is really important because there are a ton of enemy mortars in these targets. There's a whole lot of them. You need basically every gale you can get, and all gales must be boosted by a countermeasure special. It's not quite good enough to have one single CM ship. They all need to have countermeasures on them because of just how powerful the enemy is. Now, I will caveat that and say that on 1 or possibly 2 ships, you can go ahead and take 1 gale and replace that with a single MDS-3. Only do that on 1 or 2 ships. This is because in future targets, not the 538 FM target, but in future targets, and to some extent the 516, if you try and run that with all 5 Triarii, there are some missiles which you cannot avoid, some UAVs which you cannot avoid, and are going to get hit with regardless. So 1 or 2 ships should have an MDS-3, but the rest should just have 4 gales. For the other 4 weapon spots, obviously use the limited rocket if you have it. However, it only does 2600 damage versus the regular ones that do 2400. It's a very tiny upgrade and not worth it for me to get the ridiculous amount of pillager raid points for that. So I just go for the regular ones, but obviously if you do have the limited ones, it is better. With the weapons out of the way, let's go ahead and move on to the armors. It's a relatively easy decision to go 3 and 3 of each armors. I'm going to go for 3 of the penetrative armor that came out with the ship and 3 of the explosive armor. If you are a pretty good driver and want to play around with the ships a lot to make sure you're countermeasuring every single mortar, it might be worth it to go for 6 of the penetrative armor, but I don't see that as necessary because at that point you're overfitting to one single target rather than building for the entire life cycle duration of the hull. There's the armors out of the way, just go for 3 and 3. If you want to fine tune a little bit more, you could. Moving along to the specials, the first thing you want to do will be to put on the engine, and the one that came out with the ship makes the most sense, and that I believe is pronounced the Sarkina engine or something like that. It does give you a decent amount of survival, has some explosive reload, explosive damage, and it's an overall decent engine. If you can't get this one, go ahead and find the tier 11 one, tier 11.5 one, that, or whatever Garrison engine you can find really, which has the same combat speed as each other that you can use across all of them. The stratagem engine would probably be the next best option. Just make sure you are keeping your combat speed matched. For special number 2, we're going to go for a damage special. I'm going to recommend the liquid fire warheads, which is limited, gives you a very small amount of splash, as well as having better building and wall damage than the next one I would suggest, which is pretty old, came out with the Everest, and that is the K2 bombardment system. That's what you can use if you don't have the liquid fire warheads. Special slot number 3 is going to be a countermeasure special, because if you remember, I said every single gale needs to be boosted by a countermeasure special, and the best one for this ship is the Preterios defense system. It gives great anti-mortar, which is the important part. We'll get to a discussion on upgrades and countermeasure damage types in a second, but anti-mortar is what you want to focus on because you're using gales, and yes, you do have 1 or 2 MDS-3s on that ship, or 1 or 2 on the entire fleet. But that's not really what matters. Anti-mortar is really, really important. This does also give rocket reload, which will be important for discussing our last special. For special slot number, 4, you're going to want to use the Garrison battery. This is just a decent one that came out a while ago, but it is pretty helpful. Garrison battery MK2X, which gives you more building damage, more explosive damage. It lets you kill the thing quicker, which is overall appreciated, and you don't really have too many more defense specials you can use. For special slot number 5, go ahead and use the Pallium Cloak. This will give you projectile speed, which is really, really important for your anti-mortars, and you could use a few different other options here if you wanted. Projectile speed, it does exist on a few other things like high-velocity warheads, but this works so well with the fleet. It gives you explosive reload, minus spread and plus splash, as well as splash damage reduction, working a lot better now than it used to. But Pallium Cloak is a staple for this fleet. Now for the last special here, we have a few different options. You may notice I have not yet put on a rocket reload special, and that's for a few reasons. It's not necessarily the one you think, or even the one I've shown before. You do want to consider it pretty closely. Your options are essentially to use the defiled reloader right here, which gives rocket critical chance, rocket reload, and explosive damage, or Cluster Warheads III. And to show you which one is the best one to use, I'm actually going to pop up a very short Excel spreadsheet. What you want to pay attention to here is the first 2 or 3 columns in the total DPS section. This shows that the defiled reloader gives more damage and more damage per second because the regular Cluster Warheads 3 has much higher reload, but you actually max out and go below the 0.2 minimum reload possible for any weapon in the game right here, which results in an overall lower damage per second. And that is true even at U0. The U1 upgrade will bring your rocket reload up from 340% to 380%, resulting in obviously higher damage per second, but you're still above the minimum reload time possible by the game, whereas if you went for Cluster Warheads 3, you would be at 0.2 seconds if you had that extra 40% or not. So this is just to show you I did the math, and the defiled reloader is the better special option for you. So let's go ahead and throw that on there. And there's your hash code, but we're not quite done yet. I want to discuss briefly the upgrades and what is actually going to be important or useful. So the U1 upgrade gives you evade. That's a little bit helpful against the guaranteed damage by the missiles and UAVs, which is not present on the level 538 Forsaken mission target. Rocket reload is of course a little bit useful, but not that great, especially if you're pretty close to that minimum reload time already, which we are. U2 turns into giving you explosive survival, penetrative survival, and then some building damage and countermeasure reload. Now I will note that countermeasure reload stat is absolutely useless. Kixeye does not know what they're doing here, and it makes no sense for her to have a countermeasure reload on this hull. That's because the damage type of the Gale Defense System 4 is anti-explosive, which means it does not benefit from countermeasure related stats. Its damage type is not countermeasure, so it does not benefit from countermeasure related stats. If you were to use something like sprints on your fleet, which you should absolutely not do because that interferes with the built-in weapon that you're stopped that I discussed at the beginning of the video, countermeasure reload would be helpful, but it's not at all helpful here. So really the only benefits from doing the YouTube upgrade are the survival, which yes is helpful, as well as the building damage, which just modifies the base stat. It doesn't multiply your damage by another 1.5x. Moving into U3, this is the upgrade that is actually helpful. This gives you splash and spread. I guess the spread's not very helpful. Explosive damage, great. Explosive survival, great. Penetrative survival, great, but the most important upgrade stat is the last one in this line here, which is the projectile speed bonus of 25%. That is the really important thing you want to pay attention to here. So there is the build which I have for you. Go ahead and build 3 like this and 2 ships with 1 MDS on them. It doesn't matter which one's the flagship will be the same one as this. And if you want to go ahead and come back to the channel later, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss out on any videos. With that said, I want to go ahead and say thank you to all those folks whose names appear on the end screen now. They're helping keep the channel running. With that said, and until next time, this is Derpy signing out, helping you be a better pirate.